First name is Rene, R-E-N-E. Last name is Castaneda, C-A-S-T-A-N-E-D-A.
Please. Morning, Mr. Castaneda.
Good morning.
What is your present occupation?
I am a consulting engineer specializing in the investigation, reconstruction, and analysis of transportation-related accidents.
What is accident reconstruction?
Accident reconstruction, in layman's terms, is reviewing and examining the available physical evidence, employing engineering and physics-based methodology to essentially put pieces back together to determine issues related to causation leading up to the collision events and after the collision events. So it's essentially, in layman's terms, is putting back a puzzle using a scientific method based on physical evidence.
Okay, could you please share with us your educational background?
Yes, I have a Bachelor's of Science degree in the discipline of mechanical engineering from CSU Fresno, also known as Fresno State. I didn't pursue any bachelor's degrees. All my focus after that has been directed specifically for vehicular accident reconstruction.
So tell us about that work experience that you've done since graduating from college before you got to where you are now.
Okay, well, aside from the education, I'm also a registered professional engineer, licensed in the state of California. Upon completion of my degree at CSU Fresno, I began doing this kind of work in 1994 for the firm of Blair, Church, and Flynn Consulting Engineers in Fresno. I spent the first 9 years of my career at that location, specifically focused on the reconstruction of transportation-related accidents. Along those lines, I took courses specific to reconstruction. Attended seminars. I hold numerous certificates in everything from employing laser-guided instrumentation to acquire measurements at accident sites, both total stations and 3D laser scanners, static and mobile systems. I have certifications in event data recording, the acquisition and interpretation of data from both passenger vehicles and commercial truck tractors. I have certifications in the use of photogrammetry.
What is photogrammetry?
Photogrammetry, in layman's terms, is the use of extracting 3D measurements from two-dimensional planes. How it applies to reconstruction of accidents is being able to take photographs and essentially using landmarks along with 3D spatial data, in other words, laser scan data or 3D total station data, to essentially reconstruct the positions of specific evidence, vehicles, and so on, as documented in photographs or video.
Your Honor, could we maybe get the microphone a little bit louder? Would that be possible?
Just test it.
Test it.
Is this good?
No, a little low.
No.
The judge will
No.
tell you.
Just move it to your right.
Okay, is that better?
Is that better, Ms. Holm?
No. Still point the mic towards you. Just turn the base the other way. There we go.
This way?
And away from you.
Away from me?
To your right.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay, testing.
Is this better?
When you lean in, it is. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that.
Well, I don't want you to have to lean in. Pull the base toward you. Okay. All right.
Sorry.
All right. How long have you been doing this kind of work?
I've been doing this work since 1994. Initially for Blair, Church, and Flynn, and then
That's not working.
it's not working.
Pull the base closer to the edge. No. Oh.
Testing. Is this better?
It's
No.
not really.
Push it straight toward the edge. Okay. Turn it toward you. Right there.
This better?
It's the mic, it's not Renee.
It's for her to be able to hear.
No, I know.
She has to tell us so she could hear.
All right, try it.
Uh, y-
All right.
I'll try to raise my voice if that helps.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry.
All right, just speak a little louder.
I will, sorry.
It's okay.
So I was with Blair Church and Flynn for 9 years, and at the start of 2004, I started my own firm, which is Castaneda Engineering. Again, specializing in the investigation, analysis, and reconstruction of transportation-related accidents.
How many collisions do you believe that in your career you've done the accident reconstruction on?
Over the course of the last 30 plus years that I've been doing this, I've reconstructed over 4,000 crashes.
Are you a member of any professional organizations?
I am. I am a member of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, the National Society of Professional Engineers, the National Academy of Forensic Engineers, the Society of Automotive Engineers, and the Southwestern Association of Traffic Accident Investigators.
Have you come to court and qualified as an expert witness in the field of accident reconstruction before today?
Yes, I have.
How many times do you think?
I'm between 90 and 100 times in both state and federal court.
Okay. Have you worked with me actually in a trial, more than one trial before?
Yes, I have.
And have all those cases involved reconstruction of catastrophic injury type cases?
Yes.
Have you been on cases against me?
Yes, I have.
Have you been on cases with defendants?
With, I believe, the Lewis Brisbois firm, I have.
Ms. Holm's firm, you've worked with them? She's Lewis Brisbois.
Yes, I have.
All right, I want to show you 4072 is just a list of some of the defendants that you work with. So can you go through who you've worked with, who's retained you to reconstruct on behalf of the defendant in a lawsuit?
Yes, this is obviously a brief list of the multiple clients I have. They are notable, however. I get retained on a first come, first served basis. It makes no difference to me who hires me. They're going to get the same engineering work. And it doesn't matter if you're a plaintiff attorney or a defense attorney. This slide shows some of the clients where counsel has retained me to do work on behalf of Caltrans, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the City of Bakersfield, the County of Fresno, the City of Fresno, City of Santa Rosa. I've done a lot of work for counsel for Bridgestone Firestone with the tire event cases resulting in rollovers throughout the southwestern United States. I've done similar work for Continental Tire. I've also been retained by counsel for Les Schwab, UPS, FedEx, Ruan, which is a large trucking company, Land O'Lakes, prior to terminating their trucking industry. I did a lot of work for counsel for them.
It's a butter co-op
Yes,
up in the Central Valley.
it is. Then I think they have a branch in Minnesota as well. DHL Express, or DHL Express USA, would hire me. And then counsel for XPO Logistics. There's a lot of other trucking companies, but there's limited space.
Summary, all right, you can take that down. Do you get paid by the hour? What do you charge?
Yes, I get paid by the hour, and my current billing rate is $550 per hour.
And has your firm done a lot of work on this case?
Yes, we have.
Have other people besides you worked on this case?
Yes.
And why have you done all this work?
Well, it's one to reconstruct the accident. Obviously, the events leading up to it, but taking all the physical evidence and analyzing the information to ensure that our analysis of the events leading up to the collision were accurate. And it's a large time investment to be accurate. We do a lot of 3D work. And in that work, I'm assisted by engineers, anywhere from 2 professional engineers and another up-and-coming engineer as well.
Can you describe for us the process or methodology that one would go about subsequent to an event occurring and piece back the reconstruction of what happened? What is the methodology or the method that you follow?
In terms of reconstructing vehicular collisions, we typically work backwards, meaning we take and consider and analyze the at-rest positions of collision-related evidence, meaning where the vehicles came to rest, in this instance, where the young pedestrians came to rest, where the debris was positioned on the roadway. And we start by evaluating all that information. We then review reports, any and all available photographs with a specific focus on at-scene photos and video. And then we perform inspections. In this particular case, we inspect and document the accident site. And when I say inspect, we actually go and digitize the entire roadway leading up to the intersection and beyond.
This will be stop.
Yes.
Can you explain how someone would go about digitizing a roadway and why you do that?
Yes. You can document accident sites or roadways using 3D laser scanners. And just to give an idea as to what a 3D laser scanner is, if you've ever been in an intersection and you see a gentleman standing in the middle with a tripod and a unit looking through a lens, that's a total station. And it's kind of like the older way of acquiring data. The way that functions is you look through the lens, you shoot the laser goes and bounces off the desired point, say for example a curve or a light, and that laser bounces back. And it provides the instrument with a 3D positioning data of that point relative to the station. Shooting one data point can take anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute, depending on the quality of the surface, the angles, and so on. Laser scanners are the next level up. We also put our instrument on a tripod for a static laser scanner. And then we allow it to start shooting lasers and taking photographs. The instruments we use on static scans are capable of collecting 2 million data points per second. So we're actually taking a full 3D image with proper measurements for elevation and topography, and we're collecting that information. The instrument we used for this particular case, because we had to collect a long distance of roadway on approach to the intersection and past the intersection, was a mobile laser scanning system. And the way that works is very similar to when you see some of these self-driving vehicles that have multiple little scanners. Those are just essentially to detect positions. Our system is actually a lot more elaborate, if you will. We have a system that we mount on our truck, and it's actually it has two separate laser scanners, each of which is capturing data at 2 million data points per second. So we're collecting at 4 million data points per second. And we also have a camera that's taking photos as we go by. So as we drive through the intersection on approach, we're actually taking a full 3D image with elevations as we go through in both directions. So that's what we used in this case. And the reason you want that is because you want to have an accurate accident site, because it's going to be the canvas for all the analysis you're going to perform, specifically where specific signs were located, where specific roadway stripes were positioned, where some of the surveillance cameras were located. And as we're driving through these roadways, we're able to acquire that data at a much, much greater rate with a lot more clarity than we would with our static scanners.
Did you review deposition testimony?
I did review deposition.
Did you review police reports?
Yes.
What other, you did site inspection, what about vehicle inspections?
Yes. The next phase after the site inspection and documentation was to inspect vehicles. I believe in this particular case, We first went to inspect Mr. Erickson's vehicle that was indicated to us was the one he was operating at the time of the accident. One of our engineers went to Las Vegas and inspected and documented that vehicle. A few months later, we were advised that that actually was not the vehicle he was driving. So then I inspected the vehicle, which we were told he was operating in Newport Beach, several months down the road. And we also inspected, and I led the inspection with respect to the Grossman vehicle. After that, I think we were also afforded an opportunity to inspect and document some of the additional evidence, specifically components which had been separated from the Grossman vehicle that were being held for evidence storage, as well as the roller blades, remnants of a skateboard, and those types of items.
And how about the vehicles involved? Did you do research regarding the specifications, performance data, and such?
Yes, I did.
For both vehicles?
Yes, that's information that we typically want to look at for purposes of reconstructing accidents.
Did you then prepare something to give an outline of your opinions and findings in this case?
Well, we did after the long, exhaustive, and iterative and analytical process.
Tell us about some of the things. Well, let me jump to the big. Did you prepare something to present to the jury that summarizes all the work you did?
Yes, I did.
And what is that?
Well, there's some PowerPoint slides, over 100, and I was trying to condense it, but there's a lot of information to convey as to the process.
Did you share all these opinions, information with defense counsel when they took your deposition?
Yes.
Would it assist the jury and everyone to understand your analysis to show and walk through the PowerPoint and the various aspects?
I think it would, yes.
I guess as we get to it, we can explain, but to get to the end product, aside from all the review of the materials, was there other work that had to be done?
Yes.
So just tell us about some of the work that goes into, as you said, the calculations, the opinions, and such. What does it take to get there?
Okay, well, as I mentioned earlier, after inspecting the site, we inspect the vehicles. In all the inspections, we're collecting information, we're collecting data, we're digitizing each vehicle to generate scaled 3D digital models of the involved vehicles. And once we have that information, we actually generate a scaled 3D diagram of the accident site, which is going to be very useful because employing the police measurements of evidence along with photos, we can reconstruct the positions of the roadway evidence to help us understand how the debris was dispersed and where the young men, in this case children, came to rest. We also have surveillance video that capture two vehicles followed by the Erickson vehicle and the Grossman vehicle, I think about 2.5 seconds after the accident. And from that video, we can employ photogrammetry in conjunction with our 3D scan data to figure out the post-collision speeds of the vehicles as they go by the camera field of view. As I mentioned, we start working backwards. As we do that, I specifically look at the damages to the Grossman vehicle and analyze the damage patterns. In this case, I determined that there's two distinct damages or damaged areas indicative of the impact with the young children. So I essentially do work to understand the relative positions of the children relative to the car and how they were impacted to impart the damages to the vehicles. At the time of the inspection of the Grossman vehicle, I was able to download event data, a crash data retrieval report, where the vehicle is essentially telling us how fast it was traveling on approach to impact for at least the 5 seconds before the collision at half-second intervals. And associated with that information is the driver input, whether the driver was on the gas or on the brake. But we don't take that in a vacuum and assume it all to be true. We also want to look at the downstream evidence. So I run specific analyses based upon the throw distance of the young children, employing engineering and physics calculations just to see what kind of speed the Grossman vehicle would need to throw Mr. Iskander, Mark Iskander, 252 feet downstream from where he was hit. So I run that calculation independently, and I compare the results to what the event data says. And when you have correlation, then you essentially are acknowledging that the reported data in the crash data retrieval report is accurate and valid. So we do that work separately. Now that we've confirmed that, we can actually determine the relative positions of Ms. Grossman vehicle for 5 seconds leading up to impact. And we can actually represent that in a scaled diagram. In addition to that, when we analyze the video downstream, we actually can identify the time difference from when the Erickson vehicle enters into the field of view of the camera to when the Grossman vehicle enters. So now that helps us understand a following distance or a following time. And employing that information in conjunction with the testimony, now we can actually bring Mr. Erickson's vehicle back to where he would have been on approach to the intersection and the crosswalk. And doing all that work allows us to generate diagrams associated with vehicle positions based on determined speeds. And to test out our work, we also run simulation analysis. And in our simulation analysis, we first begin by generating a scenario where a 3D model of the same dimensions of the Grossman vehicle, because it's based off the Grossman vehicle, impacts two 3D geometries, which are ATD geometries. They're not going to behave specifically like a human, but certainly they represent the human based on the height and the mass. And we run speed analysis to see if the projection distances and paths comport with what the physical evidence. So that's a third method of validation.
So you triple check your calculations.
Yes.
We're going to go, will the PowerPoint walk us through everything?
Yes, and it's going to be long and tedious in a reverse process, but I think we can get
I'll
through
try
it.
to speed it up. But
Thank you.
performance data,
Yes.
these two cars. How long did it take Miss Grossman's vehicle to go from 0 to 60? That's something that's provided by the manufacturer?
Yes.
How long?
It takes about 5.2, 5.3 seconds.
How long did it take Mr. Erickson's vehicle to go from 0 to 60 miles an hour?
That vehicle can accelerate to 60 miles per hour in about 4.5 seconds.
If everything were the same, and both cars started on a straight roadway, and they were 0 to 60, who's going to win?
Erickson.
Every time?
It should, yes.
Why?
Well, it's got more power, it's got more torque. One of the things to consider is the amount of torque available. When we look at Grossman's vehicle, it's impressive in its own performance. It's got a V6 bi-turbo engine, but it's not generating the horsepower or the torque that Erickson's vehicle is. Erickson's vehicle has a lot more torque, which is going to help accelerate a lot quicker from a stop. And then it'll hold that based on the available horsepower. So from 0 to 60, just the power and the torque available to the Erickson vehicle surpass what's available for the Grossman vehicle.
And what kind of horsepower do the two cars have?
I believe the Grossman vehicle has about 385 horsepower or horses of power, and the Erickson vehicle is equipped with an engine that has 550 horsepower.
All right, let's mark Exhibit 408, and I'd like to show you. We're going to go through some of these fast. Okay, so we're going to go to the first exhibit, the first page, and just tell us what we're looking at here.
This is just an overhead map that shows where the accident occurred in Westlake Village. That's where the little star is, and it's just to give us an idea of where this accident occurred relative to Los Angeles.
And how about here?
This is a zoomed image of that location of the accident, which is in a red box.
Is this an exhibit marked?
Yes, 408. I'm sorry, 408-4 now. Okay, tell us, this seems to be more filled in. What are we seeing here?
Well, now what we're seeing here is just, we've zoomed in on the image just to show the intersection, and we were essentially drawing a box around the primary area of interest because that's where the events leading up to the intersection are happening. The north-south oriented street in this image is Triunfo Canyon Road, and the cross street at a T intersection is Saddle Mountain Drive.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Would it help to use a pointer and explain what we're...
Yes. May I write? Thank you. So the aerial image essentially captures Triunfo Canyon Road. From the lower edge to the above is the direction that Ms. Grossman and Mr. Erickson would have been traveling in. There's a crosswalk where on the far side of the intersection, and this is where the young children and Nancy and Zach would have also been coming from left to right.
Keep your voice up.
Keep your voice up.
I will, sorry.
Okay, we're on the next one. We're zoomed in a little more.
Yes, and what we've done now is essentially started rotating the image without losing sight of what's going on. It's always easier for us to work from left to right when vehicles are traveling at a high speed. So we're essentially rotating the image in consideration of the compass. And in the photograph, we have Triunfo Canyon Road going from the lower left corner up to the upper right corner. You see the curve, and then the intersection where the crosswalk is located, where the children were walking, is within the red box at the approximate center of the box, far side of the intersection.
Okay, now
Now we just essentially rotated for the purposes of analysis.
okay, and I've put in, there's two inserts in that slide. Can you explain what those are?
Yes.
And for the record, that's 408-7.
This image actually shows two of the still frames from the surveillance videos that captured the events after the collision. On the upper corner, there's a camera located within this house in the back patio that actually has a field of view extending in this direction and in this direction.
So, in this direction, that direction. Describe that for the record for us, please.
Thank you. My apologies. The house would be essentially covering Triunfo Canyon Road, specifically the direction of travel that Mr. Erickson and Ms. Grossman were in, specifically from a location 225 or so feet past the crosswalk and several hundred feet beyond. So this would the camera would capture traffic going in the same direction as Erickson and Grossman, but also in the other direction. For purposes of this work, we're focusing on the direction of travel of Erickson and Grossman, and it's actually depicted in that far part of the video still, which is in the amber frame at the upper edge of the slide.
How about the bottom insert photograph, or what is that?
Yes, the bottom is actually, it's a still image of a video of the video playback of the camera, of a camera that's positioned within the boathouse, which is this octagonal shaped roof. And there's a camera there that is actually facing Triunfo Canyon Road, capturing vehicles traveling in the same direction as Grossman and Erickson after impact. The field of view, simply because it's relatively close proximity to the road, is narrower. So you're not going to get as much travel of the vehicles going in a perpendicular direction.
All right, let me show you. Now, we're looking at what? And
This is
that's for the record, that's 408-8.
Yes, this is again the surveillance video captured by the camera at the residence on the far side of the street. And this is a video we can play that will actually show the vehicles coming through, and through intense and repetitive analysis, we're able to identify the vehicles coming through.
Okay, so what should we be looking for when I play this video?
When the video begins, you're going to see a set of headlights of a vehicle coming through. That's an uninvolved first vehicle, and it's a lighter colored, what appears to be a larger SUV. Then there's going to be a second vehicle, which is a white in color vehicle. And it's, again, going to be traveling at a relatively low speed, about 45, 47 miles an hour. And then after that, you're going to see a black SUV come through considerably faster than the other two vehicles. There's going to be a gap about 10 or 12 seconds between the second and the third vehicle. And then after that, you're going to see the Grossman vehicle. And how you know it's the Grossman vehicle, its flashers are going to be on. After the accident, when the airbags deploy, Mercedes vehicles will immediately start the hazards automatically, and that's how we know it's her car.
All right, let's go to let's play it. And if you can just point out what you think is significant if it happens.
Okay.
I assume it's playing, right?
It is, and
Here we go.
there's the first vehicle, that silver-colored SUV going by. Then there's the white vehicle, and that vehicle's going about 45, 47 miles per hour. Then, like I said, about 10 seconds lapse, or 12, before we get the third vehicle, which you can appreciate that it's crossing that area much faster than the vehicles ahead. And then you see the flashers of Grossman's vehicle. And Grossman's vehicle enters the field of view about 2.87 seconds after Erickson.
Okay. Now, what do we see here?
This is the video of the playback of the boathouse surveillance camera, the one that's near the lanes of travel. And it's facing Triunfo Canyon Road. You're going to see the same four vehicles that we saw in the last video, but they're going to be moving from left to right. There's two stopped vehicles along the curb that partially obstruct the vehicles, but you can actually still make them out. You'll see the first two vehicles, followed 12 seconds later by Erickson, and then by the Grossman vehicle.
Okay, I'm playing it now.
Okay. Okay. There's the first vehicle in the number 1 lane. And then it's followed by a white colored smaller vehicle in the number 2 lane. And then we have the Erickson vehicle, which is mostly in the number 2 lane, straddling the dash stripe, followed by Grossman with his hazards on.
Are you able to tell just by looking whether the Erickson and Grossman vehicles were going faster than the other vehicles?
You can, but to be exact and accurate, we do a full dedicated analysis to evaluate the difference in rates of speed.
All right, let me move to the next. All right, what are we're now on 408-10. What are we looking at?
Okay, so we just showed some of the available evidence that we can use for analysis. Along that, we can also use at-scene photos, where either the coroner or investigating officers took photos of the roadway. And in this particular case, we see roadway evidence, essentially a broken piece of headlamp lens. And then in the far side, we see the belongings of Jacob Iskander, specifically his helmet, his roller skates. What we can take away from this is that this area, meeting the approximate center of the photo, next to the curb, where we have orange paint and Jacob Iskander's belonging, this helps identify where Jacob came to rest after the accident.
All right, what are we looking at here?
Okay, this is a photo taken past the crosswalk, looking back towards the crosswalk. And this photograph has to be taken about 400 feet or so past the roadway from the curb, looking back to the crosswalk. So we're looking at the roadway in the direction that, in other words, Grossman and Erickson would have been approaching the person taking this photograph. I've boxed out the area that essentially identifies where Mark Iskander came to rest. And one thing to notice about this photograph is that there's a sign in the center divider that helps always correlate where he would have come to rest in any image or video. I zoomed that out just to again show where that sign is and to give us obviously a reference of where Mark Iskander came to rest after the crash.
And these are taken a significant time after the collision occurs, the police come and investigate.
Yes, by this time we've had the emergency personnel, including firefighters, come and stop and render aid to, or attempt to render aid to the young children.
All right, let's go to the next one. So what are we looking at here?
Again, these are at-scene photos, and one thing that we can glean from the prior photos is that the Grossman vehicle wasn't captured in those images. We do have photos of the vehicle showing where it came to rest, and this is about 1,700 feet past the area of impact. And the vehicle is shown at rest with the damages across the front end, showing the specific damages from the collisions. And then we have a separate angle showing damage at the right front corner, specifically identifying the center collision being with Mark Iskander and the right front corner area with Jacob.
And which boy was thrown further? What's the distances?
Mark was thrown forward about 252 feet. Jacob was displaced at an angle of 45, and that's just simply because of the contour of the car. The rounded front end is going to displace him out to the right.
So that's my question. Would being struck by a vehicle in the center, knowing the amount of energy, would that project someone further than being struck by the side of the car?
Yes,
Why?
because you have a full surface exchanging that force onto your body to be able to displace you and throw you downstream. Whereas if you are impacted by a corner with a contour, you're not getting a flat surface interacting with the entirety of your mass. You're essentially being displaced by an angled surface, which coupled with your own speed is going to throw you in a distance not directly forward of the car.
But if you're hit pretty much dead center, I mean, that's going to be the max force from the car. Is it or not that going to be the max force of the car?
Yes, it's going to be the max.
Why?
Well, as I mentioned, you have an entire surface interacting with the totality of your mass, and not just the corner of the vehicle interacting with the portion of it.
Okay, let's go to the next exhibit. That's 40813. And what are we looking at here?
Well, as I mentioned, when we were looking at these photos initially, we can't figure out where her vehicle came to rest. So we're having to reference specific landmarks, and some of the police or the responsive sheriff's department investigators captured images of the vehicle with several landmarks in the background. We had to independently go and search for our own background site photos to figure out where those landmarks were and be able to identify where her car came to rest. So this is essentially how we learned that the vehicle was 1,700 feet downstream.
So now we're looking at the big picture here. Can you explain how each insert fits into the overall aerial photograph?
Yes, so this particular diagram, the background, that's our scaled 3D diagram with the roadway surface and point cloud data.
Wait, I'm sorry, roadway surface and what?
Point cloud data.
Okay, when you say fully scaled, explain what you mean.
Yes, when I mentioned previously that we're documenting the accident site with our mobile system and we're digitizing it, we actually are getting a scaled set of measurements or a digitized scaled site diagram. And we take that and essentially generate surfaces and models directly from that data. So if anyone wanted to extrapolate distances, we just provide a scale and we can certainly do it off of any of these diagrams. So to give context to this particular image, the left edge of the aerial or the diagram shows the intersection with the crosswalk. Some distance downstream next to the curve, we have the belongings of Jacob Iskander, which essentially identify Jacob's at-rest location following the accident. You proceed further downstream, 252 feet from the crosswalk, and the sign is located in the center divider. We have an arrow pointed to a center image, which essentially captures where Mark Iskander came to rest following the collision. Now, if you go from that location considerably downstream, we have at the upper right image the location at where Miss Grossman's vehicle finally came to rest, and we have an image of that vehicle on the lower right corner.
All right. Did you do an inspection of the scene?
Yes.
Okay, let's see. What would you like to share on this exhibit?
Well, when I go to the scene, I try to find whatever evidence is still available for me to examine. And when I arrived at the scene, I found paint markings of where officers had outlined evidence. So what I did is I actually took my yellow chalk paint and essentially outlined the officers' markings. And that's what we see in yellow. So that now we have actual independent data to essentially compare to what the officers measure in case there's a disagreement with what they measure or how they plotted versus what we did.
Okay, we're looking here on now, we're on 408-17.
This is a series of elevated photographs that I took at the scene. I have a camera that I mount on a 35-foot pole. And I'm taking a photo of the crosswalk, looking for any evidence that might show up as a gouge or a scrape that would help assist as an area of impact. The lower left photograph shows the distribution of all the markings made by the officers, which were outlined by me in yellow. At the upper right corner, I'm just standing short of before the crosswalk, on the sidewalk, looking downstream in the direction that Erickson and Grossman would have been traveling. And then the last photo that we see, I actually went downstream and am shooting or taking a photo of the roadway, including, and this would depict the direction of travel on approach for Grossman and Erickson. And one of the things to note here is that there was outline of what appeared to be a long smear, which would be consistent with a young pedestrian essentially tumbling and rolling through the ground before coming to rest.
All right. And on this exhibit here, what's the purpose of this? It's exhibit 408-18.
One of the things that we try to do when we drive through an accident site with our 3D mobile scanner as we're digitizing the site is we actually mount a camera on the vehicle to essentially also document video footage of the roadway on approach. On this particular video, we started some distance before the intersection and drove through the intersection in the process of digitizing the entire accident site.
Okay, this is the video.
This is a video, and as you can see, this is on approach within the number 1 lane. You have a pedestrian crossing sign posted and marked on the ground.
Okay.
You want to?
And obviously it was at night and different, but this is just an overview so you can see,
Yes,
get perspective.
right. Just to get an understanding of a motorist's approach to the intersection from within the number 1 lane of
You
travel.
mentioned the 3D point what do you call it? Cloud. Can you explain that for us?
Yes. After we process the data, this is the essential output we get. This is actually a 3D point cloud, which takes all those laser measurements, which are colorized, and we actually get an accurate 3D diagram of the accident site. Of course, it's shown in terms of little points. We just generate the surfaces from the data. So what you can take away from here is that every tree, all the vegetation, every roadway stripe is actually accurately depicted as measured. So any photograph that you want to reference later on, we can specifically say this particular object is came to rest next to a stripe, and I know where that stripe is precisely.
And how about this here? This looks kind of different. What is this? This is
This,
number 21,
this-
408-21.
It's the same point cloud, it's just a different perspective view. This is actually looking past the intersection, but towards the back. And again, this would show the roadway that Grossman and Erickson would be traveling upon, leading up to the intersection and continuing beyond.
All right, let's go to, this fills it in?
Yes, this is the 3D diagram with the surface roadways.
Okay. 2007 Mercedes GL 450, March 10th, 2023. What happened on that day?
Well, we, one of the engineers from my office went to inspect the vehicle that was reported to have been operated by Mr. Erickson on the day of the accident. And he wasn't alone. There were different experts also at that inspection who were told to come and document the vehicle. This was the opportunity to do it.
At some point, did you learn that Mr. Erickson had produced a different vehicle than the accident vehicle?
Yes.
In your career, all the accidents how many vehicle inspections have you done?
It's going to be in excess of 8,000, likely in excess of 10,000.
In the 8,000 to 10,000 inspections you've done, in cases where there was injury or death and people are required to produce a vehicle, have you ever, in your entire career, seen someone intentionally produce the wrong vehicle?
Relevance.
Excuse me.
Relevance.
Overall.
I have not.
All right, let's go. I mean, is it really important to go through this? We know this is not the vehicle. Why don't we just run through it quickly?
Okay.
It's a similar vehicle, same color, SUV, different years.
Yes, it's the prior model year, but it's generally the same size, the same color, very similar in actual appearance.
If you put them both together, can you tell?
Well, someone like me who looks at cars every day can, but I think most people who just consider a big luxury SUV one to the other may not. And I think the only telling factor they might identify, if we go, well, we don't have to, is the aftermarket bumper bar that they have, that other vehicle has, which would be this. That's probably the main thing that would help someone identify the difference between the 2007 GL 450 and the 2016 GL 63.
All right, so, all right. Did you inspect Mrs. Grossman's 2018 Mercedes-Benz GL 43
Yes,
AMG?
I did.
Could you just walk us through what
Yes.
we're seeing here?
These are just general round photos that we have, and at the far side, what we see here is our 3D laser scanner. We're going to employ 2 of those to digitize the vehicle, but my goal at this inspection is to digitize the vehicle, examine all the damages across the front and at the right front that I can, try to understand what specifically made damages, and I'm looking for telltale signs. So for example, I'm looking at the right front corner of the vehicle. I found paint transfers consistent with Jacob's rollerblades, and that's a key piece of information for me to take back with the analysis. I'm trying to understand the extent of deformation to the front of the vehicle, and then I also take photographs and examine the underside. So while I'm doing all that work, I'm also digitizing the vehicle, and I'm going to try to extract information from the vehicle's airbag control module.
What are we looking at here?
This is actually a couple of still shots of my process of downloading crash data from the vehicle. I'm connected to the vehicle's DLC port, and I'm using my software to try to communicate with the airbag control module. That was successful, and as a result, we have a crash data retrieval report.
And I think there's some more pictures of the Mercedes or anything significant you'd like to point out.
Yes, this essentially details the process that I'm employing to understand where the damages are located relative to ground. I'm trying to identify specific impressions and damage patterns that will become useful when I'm trying to position the ATD model of a young child against the vehicle, and what type of position they would have to match the damages that we see across the front end. We did that. There's some close-ups that specifically tell us, again, also what's missing from the vehicle. We have the grille, We have the emblem that we saw in the photos. By this time, the right headlamp had been removed. And then we also have a photograph of one of our engineers who's employing a handheld laser scanner to do an even higher detail scan of the vehicle.
All right. On the EDR, event data recorder, were you able to perform the download?
Yes,
Were other experts present with you?
yes,
Did you share with others the download information you obtained?
I did. I shared it with everyone that asked for it.
And is it common in your work to download and interpret data from an event data recorder?
Yes, it is.
How many times would you say you've done that in your career?
I started imaging data from vehicles back in 2001. It's 2026, I would say easily over 100, or I'm sorry, easily over 1,000.
Are you familiar with how to interpret and analyze this data?
I am.
Is there any doubt in your mind that the data from the EDR report is associated with what you did and related to this fatal crash?
There's no doubt in my mind, specifically given all the additional work I've done.
All right, let's go to the next exhibit, 30, 408-30. I gotta move it. Okay, what do we see here that's different?
Okay, now I'm trying to document the underpinnings. For example,
Why? Why is it important to look under the car?
Well, first I'm going to look under the hood, and I want to understand the extent of deformation to the leading edge. And I'm also looking for any particular transfer that may not have been captured in the other photos I've taken. I also want to understand how much deflection the vehicle had to experience to essentially cause deformation to load the radiator supports, the cowlings, the plastic filler panels. In other words, one thing we have to understand in collisions is there's dynamic crush and then there's static crush. Static crush is what we typically measure. In other words, when we go and examine the vehicle sometime after the accident, we're measuring static crush.
And let me stop.
Yes,
When you measure static crush, is that the condition of the vehicle when everything's over or some other time?
when everything is over.
Okay. Now, there's a difference between static crush and dynamic crush of motor vehicles, correct?
Yes, there is.
What is the difference? And would you expect to see more damage dynamically or what was the other one?
Static.
Statically.
You're going to see a lot more damage dynamically, more deformation. And that's just part of the concept and understanding of strength of materials. Materials have properties dealing with restitution, meaning they have, based on how they're formed, after they're damaged and displaced, they're going to have a tendency after becoming unloaded to try to return to a normal state. Unfortunately, or at least what happens is in the dynamic collision process, you get maximum deformation, and then after it's over, there's a rebound effect, which results in the permanent post-collision state, which is now a static deformation.
So, in a high-speed impact, the damage that you see after the collision would be less than what would have happened during the collision sequence. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
How does that relate to the impartment or the forces that are being placed on the vehicle and the individual?
Well, in all our work, we primarily rely on static measurements, and that's the given. And there's already a built-in sort of error consideration for that additional crush that would not be accounted for. In terms of the analysis, it's not going to be imparted much, but in terms of the events occurring, there's telltale signs that tell us that the leading edge of the hood is not the telltale deformation. In essence, that part of the vehicle, along with Mark, had to come in further and damage the upper filler panel and the radiator. In other words, that's what's telling us during the exchange of forces, Mark's body was considerably into the front of that vehicle as far as that deformed radiator.
Is it Newton's law Do you know what Newton's law is?
There's 3 primary laws. Which one do you want to go?
Is there one that says that as much energy as you put in has to come out?
Well, that's actually the conservation of energy, which is energy cannot be destroyed, but it can be converted. So in this case, what we have is the Grossman vehicle weighing about 4,700 pounds, moving at about 71, 72 miles per hour. That's a lot of kinetic energy, and transferring a good portion of that energy to a young man who is significantly less in weight. So that energy that the vehicle had going into the collision is going to be converted in the form of damages to the vehicle and displacement along with injuries to Mark Iskander. And then you have additional losses that are going to be relatively negligible, like friction and heat. But the sum of all those energy losses should add up to be the energy that the Grossman vehicle had at the time of impact.
Thank you. This side picture of her vehicle, can you explain this for us?
Yes, this is, again, a photograph that I took wherein I'm trying to understand the location of deformation to the vehicle. On the right side, because now these damages are more specific to Jacob Iskander, the 8-year-old child. By the time I inspected the vehicle, the right headlamp had been removed, but I'm trying to identify markings that I see on the panels. I mentioned earlier there was color transfers consistent with Jacob's rollerblades. And then we have a deformation at the leading edge of the right front fender. The panel forward of the door, that's the right front fender. The leading edge has been deformed, meaning that energy, or at least loading at the right front of the vehicle, caused the deformation at the leading edge of the fender. And it also imparted some damage to the trailing edge of the fender by the door. So what we're getting here is the phenomenon of buckling. You have a force on the panel and a longitudinal, essentially transferring that load downstream.
Okay. One more picture on the car. This is a 3-point cloud. Can you explain?
Yes, this is essentially the 3D digital model that we generated of the Grossman vehicle for analysis using our 3D scanning equipment. And this is essentially now the vehicle itself that is going to be used for purposes of analyzing interactions with the young children, as well as the total reconstruction of the collision.
I'm going to show you the 33, which is the EDR report. We've seen it. So if you could just briefly explain it. We've talked about it a number of times.
Yes, this is a multi-page report. On the left part of the screen, we have the cover sheet. And essentially it's giving us the vehicle identification number. I'm detailing that I took the download, or I imaged the vehicle. And then it's telling us that it has one event that was recovered. So that's record 1. That happens to be associated with this particular collision event. The page on the right is actually page 6 of the report, and it pertains to reported pre-crash data. So for the last 5 seconds leading up to the point of the collision, we have reported speeds, and time and speed are boxed in red, and the other 2 columns tell us to what percent the gas pedal or accelerator pedal was being pressed, and the next column is whether or not the surface brake, meaning the brake pedal, was being applied.
And what was the speed at impact in your opinion and based on the EDR?
At impact, at time 0, the speed of the vehicle is 73 miles per hour.
And what was the highest speed reached in 5 seconds before the impact?
The highest speed leading up is 81 miles per hour, which is attained at 2 seconds before impact.
And that doesn't tell us how fast she was going 5 seconds before, or more than 5 seconds before.
Correct. The first sampling is 5 seconds before, at which point she's traveling at 73 miles per hour, but is applying the accelerator pedal.
Okay. Next example I'm going to show you is from the police report. What did you use this factual diagram legend for?
If you recall my earlier testimony, when I went to the site, I found the faint paint marks made by the officers, which were obviously depicted in the at-scene photos. The officers, after doing that, they go out and they measure where each piece of evidence is. And in this particular case, they did it two ways. They did it this way with a 4-inch dual wheel measuring system, and then they came back and did it with the total station. So I wanted to take all this information and plot it out on a scale diagram to see if it correlates with what I determined.
Is that what you did here?
Yes, this particular slide now is a plan view of our 3D diagram with all the evidence laid out with labels that shows where every piece of evidence documented by the officers was located, including the at-rest locations of Jacob and Mark Iskander. And I mentioned that evidence, the smear on the ground outlined by yellow downstream next to Mark's at-rest position.
Okay. This is 408-36. What are we seeing here?
Okay, and now what I'm trying to do is help in correlating where some of this evidence is located, but also documented photographically. So for example, in this image, we have a photograph at the bottom. It's a photo of evidence taken at the site. We have item number 4 with an orange circle, and it is labeled license plate debris, which is located here. On the right, I'm actually showing a photo of the vehicle that shows where that came from on the Grossman vehicle. The other piece of evidence is actually a sock from Mark Iskander. And if we go to the next photograph, or the next slide, very similarly, we do the same kind of evaluation. Item number 6, V1 emblem, is what the officers labeled it. And that's certainly the center emblem for the Mercedes-Benz, which came from the center portion of Grossman's vehicle. Likewise, V7, the officers labeled V1 fog light debris, and I still don't understand why that happened, but that's actually a chrome trim piece from the right headlamp of the Grossman vehicle. And then downstream, we have another piece of license plate debris. I didn't want to start drawing too many arrows, but it comes from this portion of the car.
All right. Now, were you able, using the digitized scene, vehicles, etc., were you able to analyze the video and determine speeds of the vehicles as they were captured in the frames of the video, first from the Golden Leaf Drive surveillance camera?
Yes, I was able to do that.
How do you do that?
Well, one of the reasons we digitize the accident sites is so that we have a full 3D model of the site of the accident. And the way we do it is we identify the location of not just the roadway and the striping, but of all the trees and posts within the center divider, which now can be identified in the camera. So now we actually take this camera and try to do a camera match in our 3D environment. We then select specific keyframes from the video where vehicles are coming by and essentially align with a specific landmark. In this case, it would be a tree in the center divider or other objects, and we essentially match that position in the 3D environment that we've built. And if we can find numerous positions based on these landmarks, because we have it all 3D and it's scaled, we can extract positions and travel distances. And if we have those travel distances and we know the frame rate, we can determine the segmented speeds of the vehicles as they go by each of those landmarks.
All right, so let's look at it.
Okay?
Do we need to watch the video again?
We don't have to.
All right, let's go to the analysis.
Okay?
Tell us how you did this analysis.
Okay.
And what we're looking at.
Sure. What we start doing is I'm wondering if we might want to look at the video just to show the, or we can
Oh, we
skip
can do it, it's fine.
Okay.
Oh, maybe not. Okay, here we go. What's that thing on the left?
That's a frame counter that we've added. So for each number you see, that's a different frame in the video. Okay. And one of the things we're going to identify, now what we've done with the video as well is we've stabilized it. And we've added the frame counter, but we have specific landmarks that we're going to be identifying in the 3D environment. So I think we can go to the next slide. Okay.
Explain to us what you did on the sequence of events analysis.
Correct. So one of the things that we had to do is understand the timing in which the vehicles are going ahead. And the first thing we did is, do you remember there was four vehicles that went through? It was a larger SUV, kind of silver in color, that goes through, and that's the first vehicle that comes in. And after that vehicle enters the frame of view, it exits about just under 4 seconds later. Then it's followed by a smaller white SUV, which enters about 5.2 seconds after the first vehicle went through. That vehicle is followed by Erickson's vehicle. And the time difference from where that second vehicle entered the camera field of view until Erickson's truck or SUV showed up, there's 12.6 seconds. And unlike the other vehicles, Erickson clears that field of view within 2.33 seconds. And you can compare it to what the other vehicles are doing. It's quite faster. Then we have the Grossman vehicle entering the field of view. And she enters the field of view only 2.89 seconds after Erickson. And from that information, we can extrapolate following distances.
First of all, it says frame number, and the bottom it says 1548. Does that mean there's a total of 1,548 frames in the video?
Yes.
Just explain each column what the significance of it is. For
Sure.
example, second column, AXON timestamp, what does that mean?
We do an independent examination of the video to ensure that we have the proper frame rate and that there's no duplicate frames, no distortion. So we run it through a process or a software and essentially extrapolate from that the specific timestamps associated relative to each of the frames that we've identified.
What's a delta T?
Delta T is the time elapsed from one frame to the next. So in other words, at the start of the video is 0. The first key frame for us is when that first SUV enters the field of view, and that's happening at frame 345. So it's roughly 11.466 seconds into the video. That's our delta T from 0. In other words, 11.466 seconds after 0. And cumulative is essentially always referencing the start of the video. So every time you see the delta T column, it's from the next frame that we're referencing to the last one.
Okay, and then the time is how long they're in the video?
The total time is 51.565. So all the values on the right column are relative to the start of the video.
Oh, I see.
And to the right side, we actually have specific notes that are important to our work. So for example, when the second SUV enters the field of view, that's 5.2 seconds after the first car went through. And then after the second car enters, 12.6 seconds after that is when Erickson enters the field of view. So this is all done to understand traffic flow before the arrival, but including Erickson and Grossman.
And how long for the next two? Can you tell us about the next two that we didn't cover? The 2.87.
Yes. So one of the things that's most important, we can identify very clearly Grossman's vehicle because of the flashers. And that vehicle enters the field of view 2.87 seconds after Erickson's vehicle had entered the point of view. One of the things to consider, however, is the relative speeds that we're determining for the vehicles, which I can address once we go through those calculations.
Okay. And what is how about the last one?
After the Grossman vehicle goes through the entrance of the field of view, there's additional vehicles that arrive into the camera field of view, but the first one is 8.67 seconds later. So in other words, there's a large gap ahead of the Erickson and Grossman vehicles with respect to traffic going by the camera, and there's also a big gap to the rear of them.
All right, why don't we take our breaks for the morning?
Take that down, take it.
Talk about the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. We'll see you back in about 10 minutes. Please continue.
Thank you. Mr. Castaneda, we left off, we had finished, or we're working on the video, so why don't you tell us about this slide, sir?
Yes, this slide is the first slide at the beginning of the video analysis phase. We're going to start with the camera at Golden Leaf Drive that captures the vehicles moving from right to left, specifically the 4 vehicles that go through. So we can go to the next slide and show how we're tying this next slide shows our overhead of the scale diagram of the accident site. We're pointing to the location of the camera, and we're showing you the rendering of the 3 digital camera match model in comparison to what is available from the surveillance camera. Okay? So as we proceed, we're going to identify the first vehicle. Actually, this is going to be the Grossman vehicles, what we're starting with. And we're referencing a landmark. That's actually a tree and the arrival of the Grossman vehicle at that tree as a key frame. So if we move on to the next, here's our digital camera match, putting the Grossman vehicle at its arrival at that same plane. And just keep in mind that the first plane color that we're using is red. So that's going to be the...
So plane, well, explain when you say each plane and how that plays into your analysis.
Sure. This is a photogrammetric method of analysis. What we're doing is we're identifying the location of the camera in 3D space. And we're not just drawing a line from the camera through the actual landmark, in this case a tree. We're actually using a 3D plane that we're projecting in a 3D. And that's going to serve as a reference mark to identify when the vehicle arrives at that projected plane. So what we see in red here is actually just, it looks like a line because we're looking at it head on, but it's a 3D plane that's being projected from the camera through that tree and past that tree. And we're essentially using camera matching techniques to identify when the Grossman vehicle arrives at that plane projection as it did in the video frame that we captured.
Okay, we'll go to the next one now. We're again continuing
Okay.
on.
This essentially is a summary of that first position. We have the overhead diagram. We have the red colored plane projected through the tree that we identified. We have on the right lower portion the video frame showing Grossman's vehicle arriving at that landmark and the matching 3D digital model. But if you recall my earlier testimony, we work in 3D, so we're actually working in the 3D environment. When we figure out the position of the vehicle, it will essentially reflect where on the roadway it is.
Okay. And we're back to the tree.
Yep. This again is a continuation of the analysis. We identified the position where it now arrives at the second landmark that we're designating. It's another tree, and we're going to project a plane right through that tree. And again, do camera matching to determine where the Grossman vehicle is on the roadway based on the same methodology.
So the first plane was red.
Correct?
What do you call that color?
People call it cyan, teal.
I would say aqua.
Aqua's good.
Teal. Well, anyway, that's the second one, right?
That's the second plane.
Okay, now what are we looking at?
This is our third landmark, which this actual color is magenta. We can go with that.
And again,
the camera matched position of the Grossman vehicle when it arrives at that plane projection. And then the last landmark we use, because in essence, we don't want to go beyond this. The landmarks aren't as great, but this is the last landmark, which is a tree, and we label that green.
and is this a scientifically recognized methodology to assess speeds from videotapes?
Yes, it is.
Regularly accepted in the community, in the
Yes.
scientific community of action reconstructions?
It is.
Okay, let's, again, this is the,
This is the 3D digital camera match position of the vehicle.
okay. We'll go to the next one. Now we have 4 colors.
Correct. Remember, the first plane was red, the second plane was aqua, third plane is magenta, and the fourth plane is green. These are the positions of the Grossman vehicle at each one of those key frames. But because this is a scale diagram in 3D space, we can essentially just measure the distance from one position to the next and do so accordingly. And one of the reasons why we want more than just one segment is we can just do 2 vehicle positions and determine a segment average speed. But if we get multiple positions, then we can figure out different segments and determine what it is that the vehicle is doing during that entirety of travel. And so now that we have those measurements, on the next frame we acknowledge that the camera is shooting at 30 frames per second.
How do you determine that?
Well, if you recall my earlier testimony, we actually run the video through a separate software that essentially lets us do an inquiry and gives us feedback as to the focal length and the frame speed or frame rate of the camera. So that's all information. Plus, we also check versus the time clocks as needed. In this particular table at the top, what we're showing is the specific frame positions that we're using, the timestamps associated with each of those frames, and then we can essentially calculate the time durations in between the frames. And if we know the traveled segment distance and we know the time duration from one position to the next, we can calculate an average speed of the vehicle as it traveled through the first segment. So in the column that reads SGMT, segment distance in feet, we have the 3 distances for those 3 separate segments. And the column prior to that is the time elapsed during the vehicle's travel from one segment to the next. The following column, after the segment distance, we've calculated average velocity during the segment.
So tell us, what was the average velocity of the Grossman Mercedes-Benz GLE during the various segments?
Okay. Segment 1, the vehicle is traveling at an average speed of 76.4 feet per second, which essentially is 52.1 miles per hour. During the second segment, the average speed is 74.7 feet per second, which translates to 50.9 miles per hour. The third segment is 73.2 feet per second, which is 49.9 miles per hour.
Why are those speeds less than what we saw in the EDR?
Well, remember, from the time of impact until the vehicle enters the frame, it travels about 225 feet. And what happens after the impact, there's braking that's applied, and it's either by Mercedes or by Ms. Grossman, that causes a reduction of speed from impact with the children until it enters the video frame. So the first time the vehicle can be seen entering the video, it's actually traveling at a speed of 52.7 miles per hour. And it is slowing down during its travel across all the separate positions that we've determined at a rate of about 0.06 or 0.05 Gs, which is consistent with engine braking after a vehicle undergoes an impact.
And so that would be my question. So this Mercedes, it may be called anti-siphoning device to prevent gasoline and fires. How does that slow the vehicle?
Well, there's a fuel cutoff. So now the vehicle is only dependent on whatever momentum it has leaving the collision. But let's keep something in mind here, Mr. Panish. This deceleration rate is not what the vehicle experienced from impact until it entered the video. That deceleration rate is closer to 0.3 Gs, which is the result of some sort of braking application either by Ms. Grossman or by the vehicle.
Okay.
And then we do the very same thing
From
to-
Mr. Erickson.
to evaluate Mr. Erickson's speed.
First landmark, you use red.
Exactly
Do
the
you
same.
use all the same landmarks?
Same landmarks, same color plates.
Okay, so let's go to the second one. Just match it up again.
Yes, we're just doing a 3D digital camera matching.
Same?
Yes. Second landmark.
Okay.
And you can see the vehicle kind of hiding behind the foliage of the tree in that point cloud. The next position is the third landmark, the magenta colored one, and the Erickson vehicle is, the right headlight is just past it. And then the very last position is the fourth landmark, which is our tree, which has a green plane assigned.
And we put them all together. Please
And-
explain.
This is exactly the same process that we employ for the Grossman analysis. We know the positions, and how we know the positions on that lane is not solely independent on this analysis. There's triangulation that happens with analysis of the other camera, which we'll get to. But we can ascertain that the vehicle's position is with its left side tires traveling over the dash stripe on the roadway. But we can extrapolate also the travel distance for each of these segments. And once we have this information, we can move on to the next slide. Again, employing the very same methodology, the 30 frames per second for that video, we can calculate the speed of Erickson. And when he enters, or when he arrives at that first plane projection that we have, he's traveling at 73.2 miles per hour. And then when he arrives at the second landmark, he's traveling at 72.3 miles per hour. When he arrives at that third landmark, he's going 71.6 miles per hour. And at the fourth landmark, he's traveling at 70.9 miles per hour.
Did any of our analysis ever show Mr. Erickson traveling 50 to 55 miles an hour?
No.
Vague and ambiguous as to time and location.
At any time?
Overall.
At any time, from the time he was traveling through the crosswalk until the time that he left the video, is there any evidence whatsoever that he was traveling 50 to 55 miles an hour?
Calls for speculation.
Overall.
Given the totality of all the analyses I've done, there's no evidence to support a speed on the part of Mr. Erickson anywhere near 50 or 55 miles per hour.
Okay. This is the same?
This is the same, but this is again for the first vehicle that went through. We're just trying to be thorough with the analysis, and it's the same exercise. I don't know if you want to go through it, but the first vehicle is essentially coming through at an average speed of about 38 to 39 or 40 miles per hour.
And you can see, in your opinion, looking at the vehicles, is it obvious to you that Mr. Erickson's vehicle is going much faster than the other vehicles in the video?
Oh, visually you can appreciate that it's traveling much faster than the other vehicles, including Ms. Grossman's at that point in time.
And this is, again, the same analysis for the small SUV,
Yes, this would be the second vehicle in the video.
and you then calculated that speed, and what were those speeds?
It's ranging from about 46 to 48 miles per hour over that segment.
Now, what are we looking at here?
Well, now we're looking at the video from the boathouse,
Okay.
but it's been stabilized. There's a second vehicle that went through. And again, using the very same methodology, we essentially limited this video to those two vehicles.
Okay, so
Um,
I have to keep watching. We all
Right.
got it.
Yes.
So, again, you're just, what are you showing here?
We're identifying where the camera is mounted that captured that video. And again, in that camera would be on this portion of the building, that octagonal roof building. And it's actually capturing a field of view just behind the gold-colored SUV that's on the curb and just beyond the gray-colored vehicle ahead. So we're capturing the vehicles traveling through that area.
All right, and another landmark?
Yes, again, now we're doing the same exercise with this camera, capturing when Grossman's position as she's arriving at the start of that first stripe. And then we're matching it in a 3D environment. And then we have the second landmark, which is a magenta colored plane in the very same manner as before. And we do a camera match to get her position there. And in this particular analysis, she travels a distance of 44.3 feet from the first landmark projection to the second landmark projection. And then what we see in this frame is the summary of the exercise for the 4 vehicles. At the upper left corner is the first vehicle, the large SUV. The upper right is the second white-colored smaller SUV. Lower left is the Erickson Mercedes. And at the lower right, we have the Grossman vehicle.
How about the speeds?
Again, same methodology to calculate as we mentioned before. We have an average speed through that segment for the first vehicle at 57.8 feet per second or 39.4 miles per hour, comporting very well with the previous exercise. The second SUV is traveling through there about 46.8 miles per hour. The Erickson vehicle is coming through that segment at 71.5 miles per hour. And then the Grossman vehicle is traveling through that area at 50.3 miles per hour in that segment.
Okay, let's talk about the post-collision travel of Miss Erickson. Let's strike that. Is it your, do you have an opinion as to which vehicle struck the boys?
Yes.
And what is your opinion?
Oh, the Grossman vehicle impacted both Mark and Jacob Iskander.
Is there any question in your mind about that in this case?
There's no question.
Okay. Did you analyze the post-collision travel of the Grossman Mercedes-Benz?
Yes, I did.
Tell us what we see here.
Okay, what we see here is actually the overhead of the roadway. Starting at the left side, we start with the intersection and the Grossman vehicle position at impact. This is based on the totality of the evidence. Then we have 4 separate positions for the Grossman vehicle as derived from the video camera analysis. So we can relate impact to that first position, that was the red projection, and then the 3 others downstream. Her vehicle, however, came to rest at the far right upper portion of the photo or of the image. Because this is all done in a scaled environment, we can essentially just draw a red line through the vehicles. And again, the downstream vehicles are our estimated positions following the nature of that curvature of that roadway. But if we measure the length of that entire path, it's 1,703.5 feet.
Okay. Have you told us that already?
Yes, I did.
What is the damage matching analysis that you conducted with the 3D geometries of the, what is the ATD?
An ATD is it's an acronym for anthropomorphic dummy, test dummy. When I work on analysis for pedestrian collisions, I employ scaled 3D anthropomorphic dummies for purposes of matching damages to relative heights of the involved pedestrians. In this case, if you recall my earlier testimony, one thing specific when I was inspecting the Grossman vehicle was to identify damage patterns and understand where they were relative to the ground and essentially the direction and orientation of specific impressions. To a certain extent, I also looked at the injury patterns of Mark to understand the potential positions of some of his extremities and how they would have been interacted with by the vehicle.
And there are some pictures that show that, we just took those out of this.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes. So right now, I'm actually using an A3D dummy of a young child positioned in a configuration that aligns with the damages that we see, with the largest impression on the hood being in an area to the right of his torso and his arm being positioned there as identified by some of his injury patterns.
And then there's actually one photo, I think we've shown it, but it shows the arm in a very irregular, unusual position.
That's correct. That's correct. And if you recall my inspection photos, there's significant damage to the radiator. And that's obviously because that's going to be loaded by his hip area, lower and center of gravity area, getting into that part of the vehicle, obviously causing damage to the grille and causing the logo emblem to separate. Additionally, there's damage patterns across the license plate, which comport with injuries to his lower leg. And then there's other photos taken by officers of the undercarriage of the vehicle that comport very well with interaction by and with the skateboard that Mark was using.
That was gonna be my next question. What happened to the skateboard?
Well, the skateboard went under the car. The vehicle exhibits clear evidence of interaction with the undercarriage of the vehicle in the area forward of the front wheels, but undercarriage. And then it was run over by the vehicle. The skateboard shows fracture patterns indicative of the tire going right over it.
Did you see photographs taken by the coroner that indicated anything on the body that you could attribute to Mark to the front portion of the vehicle?
Yes, one very interesting thing. As I mentioned, I try to look at the little telltale signs that will give us information. And when it comes to a pedestrian accident, the vehicle will have some evidence, but in some cases the pedestrian or the injured party will also have that evidence. In this particular case, Mark had bruising to his right torso, but his right buttock area, lower leg, and the inboard part of his left thigh had a bruised pattern that aligns perfect with the grill pattern of the front of the car. So that's another way we were able to match that position in conjunction with the additional evidence.
Was there anything that you saw at the scene that could cause that damage pattern of the grill on the body? Anything else other than the grill of Ms. Grossman's vehicle?
There's nothing else.
What do we see here with the green amp, the more AT, what do you call it, ATD?
Yeah, we'll call it an ATD geometry. The green ATD geometry is on rollerblades, represents Jacob Iskander. And I'm positioning his body in a place that aligns with the damages imparted to the vehicle at the right front corner, including the right portion of the wraparound front bumper fascia and the right headlamp. He's going to be loading that part of the vehicle. And if you recall my earlier testimony, there were transfers along the right corner of the Grossman vehicle that happened to match the color of the rollerblades.
You mentioned pedestrian throw distance. Is this showing the location of the boys?
Yes. So after we understand the vehicle, the positions of the young boys relative to the vehicle, we take into consideration all the downstream evidence, vehicle debris and whatnot, and the at-rest positions of Mark, who is represented in aqua color, and of Jacob, that's represented in green. And to do the best analyses on a pedestrian throw, it's best to use the pedestrian that's hit by the center of the vehicle, because that's where all the energy is going to be transferred in a much more direct way than when they're impacted at the right front.
Okay, we're looking now here at Exhibit 40884, and on this, it looks to me like some kind of math. What kind of math is that?
This is actually a series of calculations for kinematics. They're engineering computations, and it's our analysis to determine how much speed the Grossman vehicle needed in order to displace Mark 253 feet downstream. So it's based on projectile motion, it's based on conservation of energy, and it's an actual integration going back and forth, substituting one form of equations to another to reduce the number of unknowns.
We're not going to go through the math.
Okay.
And this is more math?
Correct. And in this particular slide, the page on the right, we're already coming up, we're using solvers to understand or to reduce the unknowns and get us to a much narrower figure of what is probable. Based on these calculations, we know that Mark's velocity at throw, meaning when he's separating from the vehicle, is between 66.1 and 70.5 miles per hour. And if we move on to the next phase, accounting for the potential projection efficiency, meaning we spoke about energy dissipation, energy losses. We also have to account for the fact that this is not two fully elastic type of balls that impact and bounce off each other. The collision has to account for some absorption, and that's addressed in the form of a consideration for efficiency. This particular collision is about a 95% efficient collision, meaning that's how much of the speed on the part of the Grossman vehicle was imparted to Mark. But once we account for that, we come up with the resultant speed on the part of the Grossman vehicle ranging from 69.6 to 74.3. So this is essentially the result of our independent analysis based on the evidence. And I take that value and I compare it to the crash data that was downloaded from the vehicle. Well, and I think we're getting a very good residual, meaning that the reported speed of the Grossman vehicle at impact aligns very well with what the physics tells us occurred. And this is another way of essentially validating the crash data.
And you told us how you were checking, double checking, triple checking the EDR data. This is how you're doing it, one of the ways?
Yes, this is one of the ways.
All right, and what are we looking at? It's a simulation analysis.
Well, this is the third way that we're going to actually understand and try to verify that one, the EDR data is correct, but also that our analysis of the projection or pedestrian throw distance is correct. So we actually have a 3D environment, which is based upon the 3D scan data of the accident site. We have a 3D model of a Mercedes-Benz GLE 43 like Ms. Grossman's. And we have ATD dummies representing Mark in an aqua color and Jacob in a cream color. And then downstream, we have Ms. Iskander and Zachary.
Now, you're not saying that that's where they were or anything when the impact occurred, right?
No, correct. And it's too difficult. You know, they weren't involved in the collision. What we do know is that they're ahead of the boys. And we do know that they weren't impacted by the Erickson vehicle. So this is just a sample of saying this is how the collision is occurring, but we're focusing on primarily Mark and Jacob.
And again, same thing on Miss Grossman's vehicle.
Yes, this is the 3D model of the vehicle.
Okay, now, what is the simulation and what is the video output?
Okay, a simulation analysis, this is not like an animation. And there's a big difference between a simulation and an animation. In an animation, you don't have any physics constraints, meaning you can make a pig fly if you felt like it. You can make a car float if you felt like it. When you run a simulations, there's physics constraints that have boundaries. In other words, if I throw, let's just say a bag of sand and try to roll it on asphalt, well, the physics tells us that the friction is going to cause that bag to hit and then probably stop relatively short. In animation, I don't have those constraints. I can throw that sandbag and it can slide for 400 feet. So a simulation is actually another way of running calculations with an independent check to say, if you're not matching the evidence and if you're not obeying the physics principles, you're not going to get proper results. And this is a third method of doing the validation.
And what is the name of, I assume there's a software you use for this?
Yes, the software we're using is Virtual Crash in this particular analysis because it happens to be one of the better software applications for use in momentum exchange when pedestrians are involved.
And is this something that's commonly used by experts in your field in reconstructing accidents?
It is.
Are you trained and licensed to use these programs?
Yes, I am.
And use them in the past and find them to be reliable and accurate?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so let's go to the, if I click, this is going to play?
Yes, so let me,
Tell us what we're gonna see, then I'll do it.
please. And what we're seeing here is the analysis starting just before impact with the Grossman vehicle in white at the left edge of the screen. We have Mark, the 3D geometry that we saw in the simulation from a perspective view. And we have Jacob in green, both in the crosswalks. And at the very top, we have tables telling us the speeds of the vehicles and relative locations. So what we're doing with respect to Grossman is we're having our vehicle travel at 73 miles per hour, consistent with the EDR data and consistent with our independent analysis. We also know from the analysis that Jacob comes to rest in this area, and we know that Mark comes to rest in this area. And this is that center sign in the center divider that I alluded to earlier. So what we're trying to do is have the vehicle traveling at 73 miles per hour interact with Mark and with Jacob to try to reproduce the same at-rest positions of the children post-collision.
And across the top, explain what we see.
Again, these are tables specific to each one of the parties involved here. At the upper left, we have Grossman MBC, which is the Grossman Mercedes. The next table in gold is Erickson MBC, which is the Erickson Mercedes. And then we have Mark in an aqua color text, just like his ATG geometry. And then the next one is Jacob in green, essentially representing him. And I have them traveling at about 3 miles per hour at the time of impact. So
Should
if we
play
could,
it.
yeah, if we can play it. So one of the things that we see here is if we actually know the impact configuration, know the post-collision path of the Grossman vehicle, as we know she's going to decelerate based on the downstream evidence that we've analyzed already, we should have at-rest positions for Jacob and for Mark that comport very well with the totality of the evidence and with the photos that we've examined, taken at the site. So in essence, this is the third way, because we're matching that evidence. This is our third way of saying, you know what, the EDR data is correct. In our throw distance analysis, everything lines up very well.
Okay, let's go to the, anything, we don't need on that. Yeah, just, could you explain, as each time I click to the slide, it goes down on the EDR, I think 0.5 seconds, is that right?
That's correct. So prior to these slides, Mr. Panish, we've evaluated everything from impact downstream, right? We did the post-collision speeds. We did the validation of Grossman speed at impact. We know the time duration that elapses from when Erickson enters the camera field of view till Grossman's vehicle enters the field of view. Now we're going to focus on the approach travel. And this is where the EDR data, now that we've validated the speed, we can now integrate the positions of our vehicle and the speeds based upon the data provided to us. So by taking this information, we can essentially calculate how much distance she travels from 1 second to the next on approach to impact. So the very first slide, we had our vehicle at 5 seconds before impact. Yes. And in essence, the value here is that if we were just to look at this data, okay, we know she's going pretty fast. But once we correlate it with the totality of the downstream evidence, we can say, hey, before she arrives at the painted crossing and the sign, that's 5 seconds before. And at that point in time, she's going 73 miles per hour. Okay, now I can actually associate that speed relative to the intersection. So if we move to the next slide, a second later, she's right next to the light standard in the center divider. This is at 4 seconds before, and she's traveling at 75 miles per hour, and she's almost pedal to the metal on the gas. So on approach to the intersection at that point in time, that's her speed. Second later, 3 seconds before she arrives at the area of impact, she's still applying full throttle, traveling at 78 miles per hour.
And when she's applying full throttle, 98%. Where is the Erickson vehicle located?
Well, at this point in time, 3 seconds before, the Erickson vehicle's ahead of her, just prior entering into the intersection. And the vehicle's in the process of returning into the number 2 lane of travel.
And why would somebody put down the accelerator 98%?
Well, to get the vehicle to go faster.
Is there anything else, any other reason why you would do that?
You know, I don't want to get into the issue of the psychological aspect, but unless you just totally misapply a pedal. Other than that, the reason you press the gas is to try to go fast.
But are you going to misapply it for that period of time?
I really doubt it.
Go to the next.
Okay. Now at 2 seconds before impact, at this point in time, the driver Grossman is positioned just at the start of the stripe that designates the left turn lane. At that point in time, she's traveling 81 miles per hour, but now she's no longer on the gas pedal. And she's also not applying the service brake pedal. Okay? And she's traveling 81 miles per hour. Okay. The next slide, 1 second before impact, she still hasn't entered the intersection. She's traveling at 78 miles per hour, and her service brake is on. And her service brake pedal application started roughly a half a second before that.
And how long did she apply the brakes?
Well, she applies the brakes for approximately, let's see, between 1.5 and 2 seconds.
Do you know, are you able to tell where the vehicle was when she first tried to apply the brakes?
Well, I think if we go to the prior slide, this is,
Oh, no, one more.
no, go forward one. Okay, at this position, 1.5 seconds before impact, this is where her vehicle is, and at that point, the brakes definitely are on. So it's just before she arrives at this position, in this general area, where she starts applying her service brake pedal.
The faster you go, is it harder to brake?
Well, it's not harder to brake. You brake the same, but it just takes a longer distance to stop.
That was my question. Well, the faster you go, assuming you're going at 2 different speeds, one slow, one fast, you apply the brakes at the same application pressure. Which car is going to stop first?
At the same brake application, the slower moving vehicle. It'll take less distance to come to a stop.
And did you do an analysis, had Ms. Grossman been traveling the speed limit, whether she could have avoided this collision?
Yes, I have.
And what was your opinion in that regard?
Well, if we take her back at the same position where we have her 5 seconds before, traveling at 73 miles per hour, if instead she's traveling at 45 miles per hour at that point in time and just stays at that speed, she arrives after the children clear. So there's no accident.
All right, let me go to the next one. And we've gone through these, I'm just going back. Okay, we see this? No.
Yes, this is the total simulation analysis, accounting for the pre-crash positions of Grossman, shown in white at the left, all the way through impact and post at-rest position of Mark and Jacob. In this frame, we also have the witness, Efkatari, I believe is her last name, and we also have the positions of the Erickson vehicle. You're not going to be able to appreciate, but we do have the children in the crosswalk. Okay, that's essentially the same simulation. It's hard to appreciate from such a high position. So now we're looking at the simulation of the pre-crash motions.
And it has, again, time, speed, or V, speed, and S was what, feet per second?
Distance.
Distance.
So, and it's the distance relative to the area of the crosswalk where the impact occurred. So when you see a negative number, it's before. If it's a positive number, it's after.
Okay, so for here, we have Erickson, 0.673 feet.
No, the Erickson vehicle at this position is still 167.3 feet from the center of the crosswalk. And this is at 3.61 seconds before the Grossman vehicle collides with the kids.
Did you analyze the actions of Mr. Erickson driving this vehicle?
Yes, I did.
Were you able to assess how close he came to striking Jacob and Nancy and the young, and Mark and Jacob?
Objection, Kennemer.
City Council sidebar. All right, we're going to take our lunch break. Do not talk about the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. We'll see you back at 1:30.
When we broke for lunch, I think we were on slide number 408-100, if we could go back to that. Okay. Should I play?
Yes.
Now, in your video analysis, did you determine the time that Ms. Grossman's vehicle, withdraw the question, did you determine how far in time-wise, when they came to the location, that Mrs. Grossman's vehicle was behind Mr. Erickson?
Yes.
And what did you determine?
If you recall from the video analysis, I determined that the Grossman vehicle entered into the camera's field of view, the golden leaf camera, 2.87 seconds after Erickson entered that field of view.
Is that significant to you?
It's very significant.
Please tell us why.
The importance there, it's actually involving multiple factors. I mentioned earlier that in accident reconstruction, we work backwards. The first physical evidence we have to derive the speed of Erickson is when that vehicle enters the field of view, traveling at 73 plus or minus miles per hour. We have to recall from the additional work that Grossman enters that field of view 2.87 seconds later, traveling at 52.7 miles per hour. But back at the crosswalk, she was traveling at 73 miles per hour. So she's undergone a deceleration by braking. In other words, she's covering the 220 or 225 feet of travel from impact to entering the frame of the camera at an average speed between 73 and 53, which is roughly 63 miles per hour. We know that Erickson is coming in at 73 miles per hour, which means that given the speeds and the distances, if you extrapolate back, it puts the vehicles closer in proximity to one another, less than 2.87 seconds as they're going by the crosswalk and an approach there too. In addition to that, additional information to take into consideration are the following. I believe that Mr. Erickson testified that on approach he tapped his brakes when he saw the children in the crosswalk, but he also says that he subsequently accelerated his vehicle. We know from the physical evidence specific to his vehicle, when he enters the field of view of the camera, only 2 seconds after he passes by the crosswalk, that he's going 73 miles per hour. We also know from the analysis of that video that he's actually decelerating and not accelerating, which means that any acceleration, if it occurred, and so far my work doesn't support that, would have been ineffective, if anything at all. So we know that moving them back and accounting for any brake, even if it's just a tap, would slow his vehicle from the original travel speed to a speed slightly greater than the speed at which he entered into the field of view of the camera. And accounting for those speed differences and knowing Grossman's speed from the totality of the reconstruction, we can then develop a best candidate, if you will, to define the relative positions of both vehicles on approach to the crosswalk. That's why that's so important, because we know downstream, 220 feet after the accident, they're only 2.87 seconds apart, with Grossman going significantly slower than she was at impact and than Erickson was when he entered the field of view, which means if you extrapolate backwards, it puts them closer in relative position to one another.
Okay, thank you. This is 101, 408 101, and what do we see here?
Okay, this is the very same simulation that we've been showing. However, we have now positioned a camera following the Grossman vehicle, which is the white vehicle we see here. All the data is the same, the positions are the same, it just gives a different perspective view. But if you want to have reference, so what we're looking at now,
This is 102.
this is the avoidance analysis. Do you want to move on to that or go
No.
back?
Go back.
Go back one.
Yeah.
Mr. Owen told me I should go back. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, and we may want to pause. One thing I'll clarify here is that the white vehicle we see in the number 2 lane is the witness vehicle, F. Qatari. She's testified that she was passed by the vehicles, and we have information based on photos and so on as to where she came to rest, along with her testimony. And putting her vehicle in place and showing the last 5 seconds of approach, we see a path of travel of Erickson consistent with him attempting to return to his lane of travel from the number 1 into the number 2 lane as he's approaching the intersection. So if we want to maybe play a couple of seconds, we can get a better idea of the position of the vehicle. If you pause it right about there.
What happened?
I think you're sliding to the next slide instead of pausing
Can you
it.
make it go to the beginning?
There you go. If you just
Where you
pause
wanna
it right about
stop?
there.
Right
Pause,
here?
yeah. This gives us a pretty good idea of where the Erickson vehicle is positioned on the roadway relative to Mark and Jacob, which are depicted to the left of his vehicle. You actually see that we've accounted for the braking that he's described, which is a gentle tapping of the brakes. We're applying, and I think he says for a second or less than a second, so we're applying 0.29 Gs for 3/4 of a second, consistent with just a tap. And then to the right of his vehicle in the crosswalk, we have our depiction of a probable location for Miss Iskander. I can't specifically have the simulation have her diving out of the way, and that's why we have her in that position. But certainly the manner in which the Erickson vehicle is passing through would be in a way that I describe as kind of threading the needle.
Now, are you familiar with the California Vehicle Code as it pertains to drivers' obligations when they approach crosswalks?
Yes, I am.
What is your understanding?
You have to yield the right of way. Pedestrians have the right of way at crosswalks, so we have to yield and stop and allow them to clear safely.
What does yield mean?
Yield is meaning you delay your arrival or you come to a stop until pedestrians are clear of the path before you can proceed.
Based on the reconstruction and the testimony of Mr. Erickson that you reviewed, did Scott Erickson yield to the Iskanders as they were crossing the street in the crosswalk?
Legal conclusion.
Overruled.
Mr. Erickson did not yield to the pedestrians.
What, can you describe the position of Mr. Erickson's vehicle to the Iskanders as he approached the intersection?
Well, as he's approaching the intersection, or right in this position we have, Nancy, Iskander, and Zach would be positioned ahead of his vehicle to the right, clearing his path. And according to Miss Iskander, they're kind of diving out of the way. And forward and to his left would be both Mark and Jacob in the number 1 lane.
just seeing this through now. Did Mr. Erickson's fail to yield in any way effective transit of the two boys as they walked across the street?
Search and legal conclusion. Also
Oh.
speculation.
I'm sorry?
Legal conclusion and speculation.
Overall.
I think the relative close proximity of Erickson to the crosswalk on approach and the speed probably would not afford a pedestrian at normal travel speed to try to clear the path before the arrival of Erickson.
What about an effect that Mr. Erickson's traveling on Miss Grossman's ability to see the pedestrians? In your opinion, did it have any effect?
You mean like an obstruction?
At the crosswalk?
At the crosswalk? Well, I think if anything, what we know from Erickson being ahead of Grossman is that its headlights are going to help illuminate the kids in the crosswalk, plus any braking on the part of Erickson, as he's testified to and that we've shown here, would also help a following motorist recognize that there's something going on. And that would be another visual cue that may trigger the start of an evasive response.
And as far as the ability for the boys to evade the vehicle, Miss Grossman's vehicle, was that impaired by the actions of Mr. Erickson?
Well, there's 2 seconds that elapse from when Erickson is crossing the crosswalk until the children get hit by Grossman. I have the kids moving at 3 miles per hour, which is about 4.5 feet per second. And they're getting struck by the center of the car. So even if they could assume that they could clear, they would have to move at speeds which cannot be performed by children to try to clear. In essence, they're not going to be able to get through.
Was their escape route blocked?
If escape route means getting past the path, yes, because of the close proximity of Erickson and the subsequent presence of his vehicle across the crosswalk in their path.
Let me show you the next slide. This is 102. What are we looking at here? This
Okay.
is, oh, go ahead, you tell us.
Sure. This goes back to a prior question in my testimony, and it addresses what happens different if everything remains the same, but instead of traveling at the speed that Miss Grossman was traveling at, she instead starts at 45 miles per hour, 5 seconds before, and just maintains that speed throughout her turn. So the only thing that's changed in the simulation is just changing the speed of Miss Grossman to 45 miles per hour instead of the crash data retrieval report pre-crash noted speeds.
All right, let's take a look at this. This is if she's going 45 miles an hour.
Yes, and it's the white vehicle in the number 1 lane.
And what happens?
Well, both Mark and Jacob clear both lanes of travel and arrive at the other side of the intersection safely.
I'm going to show you 408-103. It's the last slide. You just play it here. What are we seeing here?
This is the same avoidance with Grossman traveling at 45 miles per hour on approach.
So, had she been traveling the speed limit, would or the accident happen or not?
If she's traveling at the same speed, 45 miles per hour from the first reported speed, 5 seconds before impact, and just maintains that speed, she doesn't have to do anything in terms of braking or anything else. Just navigate the lane, and that affords both Mark and Jacob sufficient time to safely clear the intersection. No collisions occur.
And is it common for you in cases like this to review testimony depositions of experts that might be opposing you in the case?
It is, yes.
Did you see any expert, accident reconstruction or otherwise, regarding how the incident occurred, retained by Dr. and Mrs. Grossman?
I've seen work performed by someone in that capacity, yes.
Did anyone they have disagree with the speeds that you gave?
Objection relevance?
Overall.
The calculations of speed for Grossman align very well with my speeds. The speed determination for Erickson, when it first becomes apparent in the video, I believe the analytical number crunching shows a speed of 78 miles per hour, whereas I have 73. But I think in terms of the opinion was that it could range from 70 to 78. So it aligns very well with what I've done.
So the expert, Suway, do you know that gentleman?
Yes, I do.
And that he's working for Mr. Erickson in this case?
Yes.
And did he agree or disagree with your speeds up to the time of impact?
Based on the Grossman crash data retrieval report, I think that's the opinion that I learned. He's in full agreement with the speeds of Grossman on approach.
And how about his opinions? By the way, did you see anyone retained by Mrs. Grossman or Dr. Grossman that gives any testimony about the speeds after impact?
Objection relevance?
Overall.
Mr. Suway did that analysis that I've just
But
mentioned.
he's working for Mr. Erickson.
Okay.
I'm talking about for the Grossmans.
Thank you for that clarification. I don't recall seeing anything in that regard.
You've told us some of your opinions. Are there additional opinions that you've reached in this case that we haven't covered?
I think that's it. I think we've pretty much gone over everything.
Okay. No further questions? Well, oh, are all the opinions you've given in this testimony to a reasonable degree of accident reconstruction probability?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we're employing the physical evidence. So I would say to a high degree of reasonable engineering certainty, the analysis has been performed and the values provided today.
And all the slides we went through, Exhibit 4081 through Exhibit 408-103, those were part of the work you did and instrumental in conveying to the jury your opinions in this case.
Yes.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay, so, all right, thank you.
Thank you.